Coming up on Arirang News, Samsung Electronics posts operating profits for the second quarter even better than its projections. Still a lot of uncertainty, but Samsung expects solid demand in the second half of the year as well. Renters in South Korea now have the right to a 2-year extension of their leases. Under the new rules, landlords will only be able to raise rents by 5%. And South Korea is getting huge amounts of rain as the monsoon season drags on for a month, flooding in some parts of the country and people needing to be rescued. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Usually at this time of year, South Korea would be dealing with a heat wave. But instead, with the monsoon still here, we're having torrential rain and in some parts of the country, flooding. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Monsoon rain has slammed the central and southern parts of South Korea on Thursday morning. The central city of Daejeon is among the hardest hit, with some areas receiving more than 260 millimeters of rainfall. In an apartment complex, cars are flooded and people were trapped inside buildings waiting for the fire services to rescue them. With the water level reaching people's waists, even boats were used for the rescue. High-speed rail services have also been delayed due to flooded tracks. It was a similar situation in Chungcheongdo and Jeollabuk-do provinces. As the day progressed, heavy rain alerts have been lifted in most parts of the country. But another round of torrential rain is expected in the southwest on Thursday night. These places could get up to 200 millimeters of rain by Friday morning. The rest of the country, including Seoul, receive about 5 to 40 millimeters of rain. This monsoon rain will come to an end on Friday for southern regions, but the National Weather Agency forecasts on and off heavy showers will continue longer in central regions.
Heavy rain is forecast for the central regions over the weekend, and the monsoon is expected to continue into next week.
This unusually long monsoon is due to the cooler air that's still lingering over the country, blocking the inflow of the heat from Japan.
A stationary front is generated between the cold upper air and the warm northern Pacific high pressure, causing massive rain clouds.
The weather agency forecasts the monsoon will end on August 10th after it moves back and forth across the peninsula. If the forecast is correct, it will be one of the longest monsoon seasons ever recorded in South Korea. Previously, the latest the monsoon has ended was August 10th in 1987, followed by August 4th in 2013 and August 2nd in 1991. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul is going to distribute guidelines to hospitals and fire departments across the country on how to protect first responders when transporting people suspected to have the coronavirus. The city's own fire and disaster authorities since March have been following a 3-tier system based on which first responders wear different protective equipment. The most severe patients are in Tier A, and those with no clear symptoms are Tier C. Thanks to this system, only 5% of responders are being quarantined, down from 27%. South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has managed to turn a profit in the second quarter of this year, and an even bigger one than it had projected. There's still uncertainty, but the company expects to see solid demand in the second half of the year as well. Kim Sung-min reports.
Samsung Electronics' operating profit for the second quarter of 2020 amounted to around $6.8 billion. That is the largest figure since the final quarter of 2018. The South Korean tech giant said that while its total sales were down some 5.6% on-year amid COVID-19, its operating profits were up 23.5%. Samsung says this was largely driven by the increased profitability of memory chips and displays, along with high demand for the IT products people have been using during lockdowns. According to Samsung, the operating profits from semiconductors made up around 67% of the total profits. Also, sales of mobile phones and home appliances, which were expected to see a huge drop in demand, had better sales than expected following the resumption of production and increased shipments. The operating profits for mobile phones came to around $1.6 billion, a 25% increase from the same period last year. For the latter half of 2020, Samsung says it expects demand to rebound on products like smartphones, while seeing firm demand for memory chips with the release of new mobile and game console models. But there are some analysts who think global demand for semiconductors could decline in the following quarter.
As companies have already bought sufficient stock of semiconductors in the first half of the year, they will have to reduce purchases in the following quarters. This could lead to a decline in sales of semiconductors in the third quarter.
The expert added, however, that the recovery of demand in other products will buffer the total earnings of the company. Samsung Electronics aims to improve earnings in the following quarter by cutting production costs and improving efficiency. However, it says the pandemic remains a constant source of uncertainty. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good to have you back with us.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, Samsung Electronics, as we just heard, gave us an earnings surprise earlier this month, but now the official earnings out today are even better, and not just in its semiconductor business. What do you make of these figures, and what does that say about the second half of the year for Samsung?
Yes, thanks to strong demand for memory chips in the global market, Samsung Electronics' second quarter operating profit exceeded market expectations. Samsung Electronics officially reported 8.2 trillion won operating profit in second quarter of this year. It is almost 24% up from that of last year's second quarter profit. But in the same period, Samsung Electronics sales revenue slipped 6% on annual basis to 53 trillion won. Samsung Electronics had pretty robust business performances in all divisions, memory chips, display, mobile, consumer electronics, and so on. It is expected that there will be slow recovery in memory chip demand and other electric appliances in the second half of the year for rapidly increasing online businesses.
Well, in other news, we see the Federal Reserve has decided to keep interest rates where they are and is going to keep them there until there's a recovery. What do you make of the Fed's decision?
But Chairman Powell said on Wednesday, U.S. economy faces a long road to recovery that will require greater fiscal efforts. And Fed did not specify new steps policy, and which means their interest rate will be continued until the end of this year. It also means altogether that Fed further monetary policy actions will totally depend on the path of coronavirus pandemic.
Right. Well, stocks were up on Wall Street overnight, all three main indexes by quite a fair bit. What's the story in the global markets then?
U.S. stock climbed Wednesday as Fed reiterated their strong support on U.S. economy hit hard by coronavirus pandemic. U.S. Fed actually also said it would continue increasing holdings of treasuries and other securities, which became a really great momentum on U.S. Stock market. Dow Jones Industrial rose 0.6% on Wednesday, and tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite also added 1.4% on Wednesday.
Now, South Korea and the U.S. have decided to extend their currency swap agreement by another 6 months. That's $60 billion in that deal. What happened in the markets today here in Korea?
U.S. Fed has decided to extend $60 billion currency swap with Korea for another 6 months. So U.S.-Korea bilateral currency swap will be continued by March of 2021. This will ease the market's uncertainties on Korean won's value in the middle of coronavirus crisis. So thanks to U.S. Fed's interest rate fix and currency swap expansion, domestic market gained today. Kospi increased by 0.2%, and Kosdaq also gained by 0.7% today. Particularly, foreign investors aggressively bought Kospi stocks, particularly in high-tech stocks today.
An interesting thing we've seen during the pandemic is that banks in Korea have seen their deposits surge. People have been borrowing money, but just putting it in their savings. Tell us about that and whether you think there ought to be any measures taken about it.
According to Bank of Korea, loans to domestic households and corporations increased by 118 trillion won in the first half of this year. In the same period, households and corporations banks' deposit also increased by almost the same amount of 108 trillion won. All this means that private sector is securing cash by borrowing money from banks because they see lots of uncertainties in the future of our pandemic. And this is not a healthy circulation of money because increased liquidity should be led to physical investment and consumption. So there should be more physical and monetary policy that support corporations' physical investment.
Yeah, that was likely not the intended outcome of those policies. Professor Kim, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, starting as early as tomorrow, people renting in South Korea will be guaranteed by law the right to extend their contract with their landlord by another 2 years. And landlords won't be allowed to raise rents by more than 5%. Those changes were approved just this afternoon. Yoon Jung-min reports.
From now on, a tenant will have a one-time right to extend their lease by 2 years before their current contract ends. Two related rules were revised to that effect on Thursday at the National Assembly. The rule will also apply to contracts signed before the revision was passed. If a tenant wishes to extend their lease, they have to notify their landlord at least 1 month before the contract ends. Landlords can only refuse such a request if they, their parents, or their children intend to move in when the lease is up. The rule will not apply if the landlord has already signed a lease with the new different tenant after having notified the old one. When renewing a lease, a landlord cannot raise the rent by more than 5%. Local governments will have the power to lower but not raise that ceiling if they deem it necessary. That could happen in Seoul and other areas where real estate markets are overheated and where rents tend to rise more sharply than other regions. The ruling party plans to finalize and pass a third bill next week on home leases, which will set up a lease reporting system. That would require landlords and tenants starting next June to report to their local government within 30 days of signing a contract. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The heads of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google testified before a House subcommittee on Wednesday in the U.S. to address concerns that their businesses may be wielding their market power to suppress competition. Our Kim Jae-hee has this report.
The heads of the world's 4 tech giants, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, appeared together in a video conference on Wednesday to testify before the U.S. Congress. The hearing aims to determine if the tech titans have too much dominance over digital platforms or have edged out competitors in an unjust way, and to decide if new laws are required to prevent anti-competitive behavior. The 4 tech giants all claimed they face healthy competition. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, while answering a question, said that he was unsure if Amazon had used data of third-party sellers to inform Amazon's business decisions.
So let me ask you, Mr. Bezos, does Amazon ever access and use third-party seller data when making business decisions? And just a yes or no will suffice, sir.
I can't answer that question yes or no. What I can tell you is we have a policy against using seller-specific data to aid our private label business, but I can't guarantee you that that policy has never been violated.
Apple's Tim Cook was questioned about whether Apple has the power to exclude apps from its App Store. Cook responded that Apple wants every app it can on the platform. Facebook was criticized over its purchase of Instagram, with claims that the acquisition was to quash a competitive threat. And Google was questioned over claims of leveraging its dominant search engine to steal information from other websites and manipulating its results to attract people to its own sites. Google's CEO deflected the accusations.
We've always focused on providing users the most relevant information, and we rely on that trust for users to come back to Google every day. In fact, a vast majority of queries in Google, we don't show ads at all.
The hearing came after President Trump tweeted on Wednesday that if Congress doesn't take action against the big tech companies to bring fairness, he will take action himself. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
Thank you for the question.
Japan is going to let some of its foreign residents who've left the country come back in starting August 5th. That'll apply to certain types of visas, which include international students, technical trainees, and company employees stationed in Japan. They must comply with requirements like taking a PCR COVID-19 test and must have temporarily left Japan before the entry restrictions were put in place. Japan has been denying entry to foreigners from 146 countries and regions. Japan's already agreed with Vietnam and Thailand to allow business people to come and started accepting applications for long stay visas for those countries from today. And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.